Hi, everybody. Welcome to our first Tinderbox meetup for 2025. I'm Michael Becker, and I don't see Mark Bernstein yet, and maybe he will show up. Let's kick off our Tinderbox meetup. And actually, this is our first US focused Tinderbox meetup. We actually had our first Tinderbox meetup last night with the APAC region. We held a 4 p.m. Pacific call so that we could support some of the people in APAC in their morning. So that was we had a couple people show up for that. So that was a good call, and we'll publish that recording shortly. So here we are, and typically our format of a Tinderbox meetup is we go around the room and new people introduce themselves. We will have people raise topics, questions, or projects that they're working on, and we can address those, or we jump into a theme. And we kind of have a pseudo unofficial theme today, which is part two of Wintreese's project on working through his topics and programs. So when we can jump into that when you have a minute. I also have a quick little demo that I got inspired to work on after having read some material that Mark Bernstein had shared with me. It inspired me to whip together a quick little demo so that on doing a flip card in Tinderbox. So I thought I'd want to show that if people are so inclined. So we can go ahead and do that. But before we kick off the broader conversation, Mark Bernstein, he's here now. So welcome to our first 2025 Kick-Up meetup, Mark. Do you have any announcements or things that you'd like to share with us?
Uh, hey everybody, it's Saturday, January 4th somehow, and I'm up to my elbows in research. So I'm just going to be dropping in for a little bit. Uh, and the document that Michael was alluding to is the new book that's coming out, I think, later this month called Thinking with Tinderbox. So that is coming down the pike. Uh, but that's all for me this week.
Yeah, and obviously, Mark, if I did get, thank you for making that public. So I got to read the whole thing, and it was pretty freaking awesome. So if you have any thoughts on my comments, let me know, and we can certainly schedule another call. So let's jump right in. So where do we want to start? Anybody have any thoughts, comments, ideas that they want to address first? If not, I can pop up and show this little flip card demo that that I was inspired to do after reading the early draft of Thinking with Tinderbox, and then we can jump into Wynn's work. Anybody have any topics? If not, all right, let's jump in. So in the book, Mark presented a kind of a cool idea on. Let me share my screen here. A cool idea on this idea of where we often will think about our notes in Tinderbox as note cards. And so in that concept of a note card, a note card has a front and a back. And so this is not a very robust demo. I spent maybe a total of 10 minutes pulling it together with the help of ChatGPT, and like, can you help me write the JavaScript that I would need for doing something like this? So that was a really interesting approach on going about it. But the whole idea was you have a note, and in that note you have some text. And so let's say it's a question, and then you have an answer to that question. So, and again, there's a lot of other ways to expound on that. But what's exciting about this, and as we think more and more about using Tinderbox templating and such, a lot of people think and look about Tinderbox templates as a means towards publishing or export, but really Tinderbox templates are just yet another view for you to be able to interact and interrogate your notes. And in fact, they're a custom view that you can produce for yourself. And so, I went ahead and produced this, HTML export or template in Tinderbox. And let's kind of walk through that a little bit, and then I'll show you how we'd implement it. So you go ahead and open up the traditional organize your template. And in the header of a template, you have some CSS styling. So you've got a card and a display block for your anchors. Pretty simple. And then in the body of your HTML document, I put in some navigation, which I'll show you in just a minute, and that navigation just basically says when you click on this link, flip the card. And what's happening is on the click, you're triggering a JavaScript called toggle visibility. And so HTML knows and is smart enough when it says an on-click trigger, it's going to look for the name of the function. If hopefully it's not too surprising that this function calling mechanism looks very similar to the function calling mechanism that we use in Tinderbox. A name of something with a couple parentheses afterwards. And then you have the script, which is being called. So it's calling the function toggle visibility. And then within that element, you've got an element of, get the front of the card, get the back of the card. And then, depending on what you're clicking, if it's the front or the back, it does what it's supposed to do. And that's what the script is. Now, I'm not and Mark Anderson, maybe you can chime in on this as well and help with some of this narrative, because you and I talked about this on Thursday. I'm not a JavaScript person. I would not know how to write this at all were it not for the help of my friend ChatGPT. I basically took the very high level example that Mark had in the book, and I said, "Hey, ChatGPT, can you write me the JavaScript to make this example work?" And within 5 minutes, I had it running. So so Mark, you had some comments about that?
No, well, the comment I had was more that it's really interesting having a front and a back, which seems deliciously last century. Because in reality, if we can have a front and a back to the card, well, why can't we have end sides to the card? Because we're not constrained by paper anymore. That was where my mind went when you showed me this, because I thought that's fine, but we're not doing library cards anymore. Well, you
Right.
can, but it just seems very, in the McLuhan sense, very rear view mirror thinking. And what's really exciting is, in a sense, what you're really doing is putting views on an object here. It's another way of thinking
Correct.
about it. You said my card in this case is going to have two view specs, but you might have 10, you might have 20.
Right, and I'll show that in a minute. But where I was really hoping you comment on too, though, was this idea that you can still functionally do something when you really don't even know how it works. Like, I've got this working. I would never be able to write this JavaScript myself from a blank page, but yet it works, and it works fine. So maybe you can
I think that falls in the bucket of. Yeah, I mean, I would say that falls in the bucket of, if it works, stop fiddling. I mean, unless your stated job is to fiddle with things because you've got nothing else to do, the temptation for all of us is to sort of tweak a bit more. And whilst it's interesting to know why stuff works, I think I've done enough things I don't understand now to know that there are some things I'm just remarkably happy if I have something that does what I want, and the rest behind the curtain can be magic. And that's fine. And I don't need to worry until such time as I need to change it.
Yeah, or till such time and time you're bored and you want to like dig into it and learn something new or whatever, right? So, but I think that's a really important learning too, that you can read something like, when you read it in Mark's book, when you eventually get it, you can be inspired by it and then leverage your friends like ChatGPT or Claude or whatever your AI your choice is to figure that out. So let me show you what this looks like. So when you go to the card and you've applied, and I'm going to hit Command 1 and look at the the template that I'm applying, and you'll see we're going to do a demo of a multi-sided card too, the card of N plus that Mark Anderson was referring to. We can do that too. And it's very simple. So you turn it, and if you look at the HTML, here's all the HTML that gets rendered. And before I do that, the one thing I want to point out, the real trick is this. You're telling Tinderbox, on the front of the card, use value text. On the back of the card, use value answer. So you're just pasting the values of the attributes to the card. That's really the only tweak I needed to do. So here's the front of the card. Let's assume that's a question. Click on the card. That's the answer. And so you can sit here and so imagine if you're like studying for a test and you want to use this kind of Anki style, learning modality for yourself, you can do that. Now, what was interesting is the the context to which Mark was referring to these cards was posters. And so there's this one side where you can do this in preview, which is fine. And then when you look at the three-sided card, it's basically the same thing, all on Mark Anderson's comment, but you're just going to add a few more links and you're going to tweak the JavaScript just to have it run, different triggers depending on the class that's being called. So when I look at a three-sided card, in this context, I've got show the question, what is this? Show an image and show an answer. And so, you could easily go in and tweak this script. And again, to Mark Anderson's point, once you kind of know the pattern, you really don't need to know how it works. You just need to know where to copy and paste and insert certain comments. So for the here's the question, I hard coded that in here because I was running quickly. I also hard coded the image here and the hard coded the answer because I just wanted to get the template working. But as I showed in just the previous point, to populate these values, all you need to use is the export code value, whatever, or run some higher level function to be more verbose in what you want to be dynamically entering into those spots within the card. And you get this kind of cool little, interaction. And then so I thought that was fun. And there was something else that was the other thing. And so this is the use of this modality in preview, but as we've also was inspired from our when we all first learned about posters, the way Mark presented it, which in aptly so, was you'd have access to all of these wonderful, really robust visualization libraries of JavaScript and R and Python visualization libraries that are out there in the open source world to be able to present any of your thoughts and your ideas using these visualization libraries that are out there in the world. But posters in Tinderbox is nothing more than rendering a template just like we're doing. And so we don't necessarily need to go get some really arcane visualization library out there in the world. We're going to create our own using these two-sided cards. So if I go and look at these cards in map view, and if you look here, and if I if I use the attribute poster template and I just say the poster, hey, render this card using the poster template when you're in map view, we can get the same function in map view. So I'm in map view looking at the cards, and I'm in map view. Oops, and I'll show you this too. This is interesting that I stumbled across this. And here I'm looking in map view in the flipping the card back and forth. Now, what's interesting, if I click this, move the mouse away, click it again, move the mouse away, I can go back and forth. But what ends up happening if I click, click this, let the mouse hover for a second, and then I click again, something happened. Something in the UI is having Tinderbox think that little hover thing is telling Tinderbox this is actually double click, and I want you to go into the container. So I'm really not sure what we can do about that. But for me, I just found if I move the mouse a little bit like that, I don't end up in that somehow getting Tinderbox thinking I'm trying to double click. But I just found this whole little exercise, which really took me no more than 10 minutes to pull together. Pretty cool. Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, this seems like something I should know the answer to at this point, but is there functionality within action code to dynamically update displayed attributes from a link within the text attribute? Could you create a link within your note that dynamically displays the answer attribute when you click on it?
Well, there is what do you mean? Okay, let me parse some of that language. What do you mean by displayed attributes, and what do you mean by display? Like you could use the show function.
Reveal, update the displayed attribute. Right now in your note, you have two displayed attributes, answer and poster template. Mm-hmm. Could you put a link in the text that when you click on it, it runs action code or a function that updates the displayed attributes such that, okay, say answer then appears. say in your prototype, answer is not a displayed attribute, but when you click on the link, it updates the displayed attributes and then shows it.
My answer to that is yes, in theory, in the sense that um, displayed attributes is nothing more than a set, and presumably you could write some action code that would respond to that. It would add a new value to that set, or change the displayed attributes for that note. However, in order to get that screen to refresh, I believe you would need to click away from the note and then click back onto the note to have the displayed attributes update itself, would be my guess. Because the UI re-rendering is not that it's dynamic, but not that dynamic in Tinderbox. And so I suspect there would be a delay or extra clicks that you would need to get the desired result that you'd be looking for. When you're just working within the poster HTML preview, this clicking methodology kind of gets you there faster with a more visually responsive and expected experience. But Mr. Anderson, you're cogitating there, I see. What's your response there?
Nothing. That's not exactly my area of close expertise, or not anymore, not for a long time. Yeah, I think what I hear being asked is that in essence, instead of showing me a different view, can I basically have the view I have enhanced? So that takes you really down the path of using sort of Ajax type stuff. I mean, unless it's a simple show hide, but as you rightly point out, that for all sorts of perfectly good reasons that we don't normally have to worry about as a user, is that you may want the poster to actually be more responsive to changes within the displayed HTML page than is actually intentionally done. But Mark could speak better to that than me. I mean, to me, this has a feel of be careful what you wish for, because you can go down the rabbit hole where suddenly you're trying to write, the most interactive page possible in a map in Tinderbox, having forgotten to ask the first question of why, because it may be what you need to do could be done, for instance, more easily in Tinderbox.
Yeah, and then you end up like the restaurant of the end of the universe. What's the universal answer to the question? 42, and then like, well, we forgot what the question was. Yeah, after enough long period of time. Oh, this is cool. So Mr. Bernstein just put in. Apparently, there's a 7th century flashcard written in stone. That's kind of fun. So did that sufficiently respond to your answer, Mr. Rogers?
Well,
question?
I've never considered it before, whether or not you could change the displayed attributes of a note by using a link within a note. And why you would want to do that, I don't know. I just wondered if that was something that was capable.
Well, and it does beg one question: is can you trigger action code by clicking on some HTML? And I guess Mr. Bernstein would need to tell us that. I don't think so. I've never heard of us doing that.
Well, I'm not even talking about HTML. I'm talking about you create links within Tinderbox between notes, and notes can contain functions that operate on other notes. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
It strikes me as a cockamamie approach, but you can have a link, a text link from a note to the note, and the text link could have a link action, which would change the displayed attributes. So you could toggle the displayed attributes dependent for each reversal of the link.
Yeah, that would work.
So I think that would be doable, but it would not shock me if something went awry. But I certainly don't have a test on that behavior, because it's only when Dave suggested it that I said, yeah, you might be able to do that.
Well,
so if you click, sorry, go ahead.
So it just occurred to me that in a writing environment, that my blog posts have a whole bunch of displayed attributes as metadata that I only display them so that if something goes awry, they're right there. I can see them. Most of the time I don't need them. But if I could create my prototype for an entry that automatically has a link built into it to turn on the attributes that I care about, then I only have to I only have to click that once to see for that note what may be problematic. I can't conceive of a use case for doing something like that, but it's not an important use case, but it's something I think that might be useful if there is data within your attributes that you don't necessarily need to see in every note in the prototype of a note, but there may be occasions when you want to look at that briefly and then hide it again. So
Yeah.
I believe there's an attribute that you can use to hide the displayed attributes entirely. And so you could toggle that attribute.
Yeah, that's this.
But that's all or nothing.
Yeah, which one is that too? It's I use
Hide
that
display
actually.
attributes.
Hide displayed attribute. Yeah, I use that in my other file. Let's see.
I
And you
just put
could
a link
switch
in the
between
sidebar.
you could switch between prototypes.
Yeah, or you
Where-
switch between prototypes. Yeah.
Where like a prototype inherits from the main prototype but has a different displayed attributes.
The other thing is, if I just put a link in the sidebar, if you did this, whichever of the several methods have been suggested, and you found that essentially it was all working, but the UI hadn't caught up, it wasn't showing what you thought it should. There's an update method that basically fills this gap, because sometimes it's not as obvious. The change that I as a user think has happened is not necessarily so obvious behind the curtain to the app, for all sorts of good reasons. It doesn't really matter. But the point is, sometimes, and actually fairly rarely, you want to sort of say, no, trust me, I want you to update the UI. And that's essentially at the heart of what the update is allowing you to do. You shouldn't, if you're needing to use it a lot, that's probably you're sliding into maybe a feature request, or you found something that sort of wrong, because generally the app gets this right. And bear in mind also, one of the reasons that the app doesn't always do things as often as you think it might is that it's doing other things. So we don't see the other things that are being done, and notwithstanding the fact that laptops and things are very fast now, nonetheless, there are other things that are going on. All the sort of signaling that has to go on behind the curtain.
Yeah, and there's a notation you have in the bookmark about just that very thing, where you're asking the tool to do n number of activities, but actually behind the scenes to update the book. I don't remember the number. It was like some thousands, if not millions, of different processing things that are happening behind the scenes to keep all of the pieces connected together. So I think that will be interesting for people to learn more as they when the new book comes out. Just to really understand the complexity behind the emperor being behind the curtain is doing a lot of stuff. Cool. Any other thoughts, comments, reactions? I mean, interesting. Cool. So let's jump into our next thread for today, which would be, Wynn, did you have a chance to play with our have any thoughts on what we had done before?
So where I am is working mostly on using what we've got and some minor things that I've added to the structure. No really interesting Tinderbox angles yet on it for course content and thinking through what I'm trying to do with it. So today I don't have interesting new questions about how can I or things to show about other cool ways of doing things in Tinderbox with this, some of which I still hope to do, but I'm not sort of there yet, and I don't have well-formed thoughts on them. So sorry about that.
No worries. So let me, but let's, what we wanted to do was, where were we at in terms of our automation? Let's see, let me open up the file and see if we can remember where we picked up. Oh, before I forget, Mark, Winterfest, is it still going on?
Yep. but we're getting into the last weekend, so be sure to get your goodies.
All right. Let me this one up. Okay, this is interesting, Mark. I don't know what's going on. I'm opening up this file and I'm getting this toggling behavior.
Yes, that you've hidden the what do we call it? The breadcrumb bar.
Yeah, and where do I turn that back on? I was unintentional. Show tabs, maybe? There we go. Oh, there I go. I got it. Show tabs.
Yeah.
Got it. So it's under the view menu tab, hide show tabs. Okay, got it. That was unintentional. So we can collapse that, and here's the course. All right. So where were we at when we last let off? We were talking about the agents.
We were talking about the agents and sort of pulling everything together, because what I was interested in at this point was sort of building the outline from the lecture out of topics that I had said, oh, this is going to be in lecture one, while thinking at the topic level, and then coming back to focus at the lecture level, which means we need to put those in order. And out of that, so for a given lecture, there's going to be a set of things like there are just sort of opening and closing announcements. There are some in-class activities. There's which are related to topics. Topics get covered, and I eventually some of that will be driving export of artifacts for things. Also, what I'm thinking about, because I haven't fully decided about this, is that this year I'm being much more deliberate for individual class sessions about the detailed learning objectives for that session, and how those get assessed. So one of the things I'm thinking about building out in the outline is, and this may go along with the topics, but we know how to gather those up with agents, is an objective sort of has a statement and an assessment of some kind. And what I'd sort of like to do is, in a sense, scatter my assessment questions through the topics and or lectures, and then have another kind of note that rounds those up to export the first draft of a quiz. I'll probably work with that then, but I've got sort of all the raw material, and I've done that by thinking at a very granular level about the objectives and how I want to do it. So I'm not trying to remember that all later. You sort of pull it all together from the pieces already laid out.
Yeah, and so in some respects, leave yourself some breadcrumbs. So as you're thinking with Tinderbox, you have that initial idea, capture some initial idea that you then can incrementally formalize later.
Right.
Okay.
And then, like we've been doing, and so a lot of this is using the same kind of methods we've already sort of worked through. So there's not much novel in the methods, but reusing the concepts for when I'm thinking about it, and having a visual indicator that these learning objectives don't have assessments on them. I need to fill those in so I can sort of get a sense about the to-do list and the gaps on things, in the way that I want to use visual indicators on lectures not fully prepared, topics not covered, the dependencies are out of order for it. So those are the kinds of things I think I more or less know how to approach until I get confused and have to come back. But I'm not mystified about the possibilities there now.
Yeah, so you're getting this confidence that it can be done. You just don't necessarily know. You haven't done it yet, so you don't know how you're going to do it, but you're confident in some capacity it can be done.
Right.
Which
and I
is
think I have
huge.
I have enough of a direction to go in based on what we've been doing. That I have a starting point. Whether I may get stuck, but that's a different question. I also had just an interesting question I wondered about with the dependency mechanism we came up with on the fly.
Yeah, so let's do that. Let's Mr. Anderson comment, and then we'll circle back to where we were at when we ended our dependency discussion.
Okay, it's a very quick observation, really, and it shouldn't take us off on a tangent. But just I sort of as note to self that if doing this is to bear in mind, in a sense, you're doing two parallel processes. One is the making the whole process. So it's things like capturing, I had this idea, did I use it, where's it used, and all that sort of thing. And then the other will be further on when you're wanting to actually, for instance, use the result of all the marks and that kind of thing. And although they're all happening in the same Tinderbox, it's just a note to think how you keep those deconflicted. In other words, because you're probably not going to want to do both of them at once. And also, the more of the automation that you get done in the setup side, then hopefully the simpler will be when you're just trying to get information out, when you're doing marking and assessment, when you've got more important things to be doing. So actually, you want everything to be quite fleet of foot, and you not have to tinker too much. But I'll leave that side point there. Thanks.
All
right.
And Mark, just to follow up on that a little bit in what you're talking about, what I'm imagining is that there's not an aspect of the grading that comes are sort of handling the student work that comes back into the Tinderbox.
Sure. Okay.
Part of the flow.
I guess what I was thinking of is it was just a sort of a lesson learned along the way, which is that if the sort of the mise en place of the creation of the sort of syllabus of the whole thing, for instance, is relying on various sort of rules and edicts and things running. Once that's done, or when you're just using the document to provide you with information, then you probably don't need or want to have all that stuff running. I mean, generally we. I
see.
But it's more a mental approach than something. So in other words, these are parallel but discrete things happening across the same set of information, but they're done for a different reason in a slightly different way. And if you just have that in the back of mind, it means that at some point you think, I'll make it this way, so that basically when I've set it all up, I can turn all this off, because I know at that point I'm happy with the state of the document, and I now wish to use it broadly as an information source for sake of argument. And then you might go back and come back and say, oh, I've had 5 more good ideas, right? I'll switch into my sort of design mode, and then you might be running different code or using different prototypes. Yeah, I don't want to derail us there, but that was sort of the thought was in my mind.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting to spin off and sort of imagine this. Like, for example, the one thing I could imagine doing, if it seemed fun enough, would be to, in effect, lock a lecture after its date, or like the day before or something, so that and then maybe in some of the related edicts and rules and agents and stuff that are going on, if something wants to change that lecture, it gives me an error, a visual indication of that, because I can't go back. If I'm saying I'm going to cover this in lecture, not going to happen.
Well, no,
At least
indeed,
this time around, right?
It will avoid an unforced error of that. But also,
Right.
if your process is saying, well, give me all the lectures, which in fact is all the lectures I haven't given, that list will get smaller as you go through the course. So it can do all sorts of useful sort of stuff that we like to call AI these days.
Yeah.
It can do. Just feeding that into the process. It's just there to help you not expend effort thinking, because in a sense, if you're having to second guess the automation you've written, it's probably Mother Nature pointing out you may have missed a step out in your appreciation.
Yes. And then
Fantastic.
one of my goals out of this, which is probably obvious, but has so far been unstated, is that I'm hoping that doing it in this form makes it much easier for me to revise for the next time I do this.
Sorry, I'm just taking a note in the chat. Okay, so you were asking a comment when about kind of picking. Hang on, my boss wants back in the room. Oh, nope, she doesn't. Okay. So we were going to pick up where we left off. We were hard coding our topics element before. And what we were saying VLIS topics covered equals introduction operating system. Then we were saying if this, how was that working? And we were saying if this was not, if, you know, so if in introduction to operating system course, topic A, it did not include topic A, then we turned it red.
Right.
You remember?
Yeah.
So, and then, but you notice we kind of hard coded things. So how did we want to, you know, where were we at in terms of wanting to modify that thinking?
So the thing I was thinking about for predecessors is the if we've got it is whether it would work better with the code instead of so the approach now to recap is we have code that builds up a list using edicts of the topics covered in each lecture. It builds up the list so that you can look at the lecture and say what are the entire list of topics that have been covered so far.
Mm-hmm.
And in a sense, there's an easier condition that we could use, which is sort of for every predecessor topic that's associated in the attribute for, on a given topic, is to look up the lecture number of that topic, because we know what lecture it's assigned to, or we can calculate it, and just compare sibling order from the which is the lecture number from there, instead of mucking around with the list. I'm wondering if that is an easier way to do it.
Okay, I think I lost you, so let's try it again.
Okay,
So right now, what we're saying is like for topic B, lecture you know, A and C needs to come before B for whatever reason.
Right. Yes.
Okay, and so we're managing that, and then we're assigning you know, and then I think what we broke for some reason too, if I wasn't mistaken, what we broke was the fact that being able to see the fact that B has been assigned or your A has been assigned to where did we do it? Yeah, like A has been assigned to operating system. You know, I thought we wanted to actually have the word operating system, you know, the operating system in here. So we'd actually, when we were looking at the lecture, we actually knew what, you know, what lecture that topic
Right.
had
So
been assigned to.
yeah, that is a good thing to do. It's
Okay.
different than the dependency checking, but
Right.
that is useful just because then you can sort of look at it and say, yes, it's in the right place.
Right. Okay. So let's put that on the list. All right. So we can do that too. So how do you want to proceed? How do we want to start? What would be the next thing we want to kind of achieve?
So one is to go ahead and add the part about if we assign well, let's see, when we assign topic B to a lecture, then the value of the lecture, so I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of multiple things at once. So I want to be able to assign topic B to a lecture. The easiest way to do that in is when we talk about dragging in. That's a sort of a drag action, but often
Oh, I
it's just
remember what
easier to
happened.
type it. So the question is, what's the best way to enter a reference to the lecture I want it to be in? And
Right.
a cool thing would be if like you could like start typing the name and it just sort of like, completed or narrowed until you got it. That would make it very nice and efficient.
Mhm.
It could be by reference to lecture number, except that you need the note reference in case the lectures get reordered.
In case they get reordered or renamed, right? So
Right, yeah. And so a convenient interface would be that I set, edit the attribute for topic A. I'm looking at it and I say, oh, it's going to be in lecture 3. And then what Tinderbox sort of magically does is convert that into a reference to the note that is currently at position 3.
right.
So if I reorder it, then I get it. And the display I would like to have of that attribute or of the visible attribute for the topic is probably what is displayed in the outline, sort of display name we use there, because that is a quick shorthand that tells me almost everything I need to know when I'm just looking at the topic.
Right. Okay. Bruce, your hand's been up for a bit.
I'm just kind of thinking about this, and it could be that I don't know what I'm talking about, but it seems to me that having, as opposed to dragging it, having the topics all there is actually very useful. But would it be possible to create an alias that would go under the lecture and then use the displayed expressions to create some action code to be able to populate topic B to say something like added to L2 or that kind of thing? So you could have it, you could keep it in the same place, but then see that it has been in fact added. Or is that just completely
No,
off?
Bruce, that's really interesting because what we already have, or is sort of in part, is agent that rounds up the topics that have been assigned to a lecture.
Okay, I didn't realize that part.
Agent, yeah, that was in part 2 of our discussion. So an action that the agent could do would be to set the that information in the topic that was just added, or all the topics that are added. Just like it just goes through and does that on all of it as an agent action. For it would be a way to do that, and then because they're aliases, you would see it when you're looking at the topics.
So the only piece is that under topics, you can see because B is highlighted that it has been added, but you don't automatically see where it has been added to.
No, B, you're saying B is highlighted here. It's turned red because
Second
it's
B.
actually in. What do you mean second B?
Under topics.
Right. Well, you're seeing it highlighted in red because it's been interjected into a course before
Sure,
one
understood,
of its
but I'm
predecessors
saying-
need to be run.
But you don't immediately know where it has been added to. And that's where the displayed, I think it's displayed expression, right? Might give you a little bit of information by adding that to the topic B under topics.
Well, you could do that, or you add it into the lecture. That's what we were talking about earlier. You put the value of the lecture name that it was put in here, or to your point, you added display expression that shows that this has been added to introduction, lecture 1, introduction to class. That actually is not a bad idea, but I think you
Yeah,
might
right. I
want to end
see
up doing
that
both.
Bruce's idea there of also updating the display for the topic to indicate where it is assigned is really handy. Also,
Yeah,
that
no,
just gives
actually
you
a good
another
idea.
that gives you another visual indication. That gives you a visual indication that it is assigned, right? It's got a lecture. It's got it tells you which one it is right there.
It
You
just
don't have to
strikes
track
me
it separately.
that as this grows in complexity, that something like that would just be a useful roadmap. There probably are other
Oh
ways
yeah,
of doing it.
yeah.
That was my thought. I didn't used to have thoughts like this before I took Michael's course, by the way.
I'm sorry.
No, he's turned me
Yeah,
into Algernon.
at least it's not happening at like 3 a.m. for you, like it is for me. You wake up in the morning, you're like, oh, damn. All right. That's good. Mr.
Well,
Anderson.
there's treatment for that, but we can talk.
Mr. Anderson.
I was just thinking, not least of which, because there are people, whether in the room or watching later, will think, yeah, I'm doing this, but I'm doing something slightly different. That a reflection I take away from this, and it might have been something we did in an earlier thing, and I'm just spacing on it, but is in looking at this, is working out for yourself. And this is a slightly different tangent to what should be a prototype or something, is to say, right, what are the immovable parts? So clearly there's a relationship here between lectures and topics. Now, the lectures may have titles because that might be mandated by the organization you're in, but you may, for instance, have a choice as to what you put in it. And these things will always vary. But I think actually capturing that yourself so you understand it, because that means it's in the back of your mind that as you're doing this automation, because part of what we're discussing is effectively what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure we have no errors or omissions, or we don't have something overloaded. And we're trying to do a sort of a sufficient but not overloaded amount of backward signaling. In other words, you see that something tells you that effectively its state is correct. It does have, it's got 0 errors, 0 omissions, this kind of thing. And that's why I think is actually, and the reflection came to me just listening here and discussed of sort of doing this extra pass at the beginning, say, okay, what are the immovable blocks in this? Because in other words, every time I move this, every time if I put a topic on, do I have to remove one, or can the list of topics be endless? But there is a relationship. So so in this case, it seems to me that the lectures and the topics are probably the key things, and most other things like the assessment of the questions fall out from those. But they are two separate. They're two discrete things in this whole corpus. That have to relate, but they are themselves. They have their own little set of rules, and understanding the vagaries. And as somebody said, well, the lecture might change its name. Okay, well, if that's the case, how many places have we hard coded the name of the lecture? It's doing this sort of thing. It's probably the second time you do one of these. The first time you just get the whole thing running, because there's enough complexity. The second time, I think I come back to, oh, right, okay, so some of these things are going to change, or it turns out that there aren't a consistent number of lectures per module or something because reasons. But it allows you to say, okay, where have I effectively hard coded this? Not by intent, but because I didn't think it was something that would vary. And that I think can also help you give you a degree of flexibility. But I think quite genuinely saying it's probably something you do in a sense the second time around. I think if you try and do it at the outset, you give yourself way too much to do.
Right.
Because you tend to dive down the rabbit hole of making all sorts of configuration stuff, which you haven't yet learned. Well, you're doing this configuration for a process you've not fully internalized.
Also, too, I think the other thing that from a layer of abstraction, and that's why it's kind of nice to do it in a test file like we're doing it, because at some point, what I could see end up happening would be, let's say like this has been introduced to topic, just rather than having introduction to class here, you actually have the ID number of the note, which is then insoluble, meaning it will never change unless you copy it into another file or something like that. And then so that would then enable you to be able to allow the name of the note to change. And so therefore, if you're using its ID number, then to Bruce's point, if you're using displayed expression or something like that, you don't have to worry about the note name changing. The problem with that is no one ever will remember the name of know what that ID means at visual inspection. So you just have to, so to Mark Anderson's point, get your system up and running. And then when you understand the abstractions and the associations, then you can start swapping things out, actual names for things like ID number, and live a little bit more abstraction, but that can get really squirrely quickly.
But bear in mind that if you find, for instance, taking Michael's point, if you find that it actually makes sense to be using IDs or ID or ID string or one of these sort of things as the sort of the linkage, there's nothing to stop you building some additional attributes whose only job is to show you the human readable version of that. So in other words, you don't show them all as displayed attributes. They're there. You could have a separate prototype, for instance, if you just wanted to see them while you were working on them because something had broken. But for normal use, you might be doing all the sort of the signaling of the interrelation of the pieces using things like ID strings, but you might actually have displayed attributes in notes whose tellback is to basically they go away, look up what is the current name of note 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and just show that to me. And it might seem like duplication, but it's duplication to a good reason. It gives you the robustness to change. And you did that because you realized the thing might change, or you experienced a situation where it did change and you hadn't allowed for it. But it gives you something that is essentially human relatable, because 10-digit numbers are not where most of us live.
Okay.
Right. So given this discussion, what I would probably do after Michael's comment is change the attribute name to lecture ID, just so that when you look at it, you say, oh, that's an ID thing, not a name of it.
So let's play with that. So to that point, we've got say lecture ID, which then also begets potentially the new idea of lecture name, right? So you could actually have, and the interesting thing, and this is where it gets a little bit squirrely because of the idea of sets versus lists. They won't necessarily be one-to-one paired, but what you could do is make that a set 2, and then on a lecture, is it lecture? Yeah.
Well, so in the design I have in mind, a topic gets assigned to one lecture, and if I am doing sort of an aspect of it at a different one, it gets a different topic.
Yeah, got it.
Just that,
right. So there's a one-to-one relationship there, so you don't have to be too squirrely there. But my point being is, if you had, say, 3 topics in this class, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 5, 9, 2, right? Because it's a set, the set's going to sort itself alphabetically. And when you run that, and then when you go say, hey, Tinderbox, go get me the note name for these ID numbers and stick them in lecture name. And if lecture name's a set, it's going to get resorted alphabetically. So then when you're looking at the list, number 1 in lecture ID is not necessarily going to be the same item as number 1 in lecture name. It won't, you won't necessarily be allowed that association depending on the sorting that you end up with. So it would just be something you need to consider. Do you use list or set?
In some cases, you have to watch out for how you're tracking those.
Is Tinderbox resorting it for you because of the way sets and lists are handled? Those are the kinds of internal operations that you want to be thinking about.
One thing you might bear in mind there is a way around that problem is because in times of yore, we would have passed a list to a set, got it deduped and given it back. If you have lists, if you want to list a multiple value attribute to hold the items in the order in which you created them for whatever reason, but you want that list not to change, then generally you don't want to use a set because a set will
resort.
But so you said, well, that's fine, but I might get a duplicate. Well, your friend here is the .unique operator. So if you say my list equals my list .unique, it will give you your list back deduped as sorted, and I think I was looking it up. I think it holds on to the first one. Now, if you've got a thing that's got 3 versions, and you know, in some cases you want the third one and some the second, I think that's evidence of a deeper problem. But generally, if you just want to keep on top of perhaps duplicates that get added on the end, then unique should help you without having to resort to a set, and then you have a different problem of being resorted. Just a wrinkle to bear in mind.
So, Michael, this reminded me of a question I need to find out the answer to, so I'll ask it. So if we go to one of our lecture examples where we have the multiple topics, there you go, and the agent has rounded up the topics. Let's look in the outline view
the agent, sure.
at the agent. Yeah. So if I rearrange the order within the in the outline order of those within the agent, is that stable against future actions of the agent?
Say that again.
So we've got our topic. So if I moved, well, actually, one question is: can I drag topic B above topic E in the outline order within the agent?
I don't think so.
Right. Okay. So the order in the agent, it's sort of slightly mystical when you start. The problem, no, the trying to drag an alias under an agent won't work because the agent owns the aliases, so you have to let it just respawn, right, if it should be there. But I think what you're essentially asking is, if I have a list that's being acted on by an agent, so what's the relationship there? Well, the agent, well, normally with a list, when you add something, you actually add it to the end of the list. The order in which lists are created is normally in the order that they're passed. Now, an agent can have a sort. Now, most of the time when we build an agent, we don't think about those things because it generally gives you things generally sorted in the original outline of the thing order of the things found. But the more agents you have running and the more things you're doing, that may not quite happen. You'll get all the right things, but you may not get them in the order that you supposed. So if you know you want them in a particular order, then set the sort, the dollar sort. So if you go, in fact, if you've got whoever's got the inspector open, if you select the right hand, the Death Star icon in the top row, and then it's the rightmost sub tab below that on the action inspector, is sort. So you can tell the agent, just as you can a container, they say, what I want you to do is I want you to sort by whatever attribute you choose. And it may be, for instance, you realize that you don't have an attribute that holds your sort order. So that's another note for the jotter that you need to create an attribute to hold that and make sure it's populated correctly so that you can use that as a sort. When you do that, the sorting within the agent should probably follow the list that you would expect, sorry, the order you would expect to find in your list. Does that make sense?
Yes. And so I'm trying to think now about, the idea that I would like to have, and I think we can implement this in the way you describe. The UI may be a little awkward, or maybe there's a better way to do it. Is that so one thing I think I like about the general organization we're working with is that there's a phase where I'm focusing on topics and what the sequencing of those things is, and at sort of a granular level, what the pieces need to be. So I've got the building blocks for what will be spread out through the semester. And then I need to put those into delivery units, which are lectures for it. So we can round up all of the topics, which may be from sort of 3 different topic areas, because I've got one main thing and I've got like this. In my class in particular, I need to teach the students something about operating systems, it's not really about security, but they just need to know it to understand the security stuff. And I can lay that out in a different lecture for it because it goes together with something else. And so then what I want to do is within switch to, okay, I've got the stuff I'm going to do in this lecture. I want to put in the sequence that I want these things to be in. And that's a nice outline, move up and down kind of operation.
Okay. So my thought there on that then is one way to do that to Mark's point is, and since you know the topic is one-to-one to a lecture, you can have an attribute called priority. And you just and when you're looking at the agent, you just change the priority. And let's just do that right now, right? So if we were to go in here and we add a topic, and we'll say it's or let's just mean more or yeah, how about sort rank, right? So we'll call it sort rank just for lack of creativity. Right, and so then you go here and you reset the, did I do it right? Sorry, where am I? Topic sort rank. So why aren't these? There we go. So what you can do is, let's say you wanted, let me reset all these. Attributes, reset. Oops, that. Okay, so you can do here and say, let's say we want this one to be 1, that one to be 2, this one to be 3, this one to be 4, right? And then all you need to do is go to the agent and you say, sort by sort rank. Right. So that way, when the agent reruns, they'll get sorted. And another way, and a kind of a quick way to help you with that too, is if you use columns and you go like here and you say sort rank, you can quickly eyeball this too, and now see, okay, here's my sort. So then if you wanted to, you could say, no, what I wanted this one is to be 2 and that one to be 3. And then when the agent reruns, they'll sort. So that's another kind of quick way to do that.
That's based on the framework we've got. That's a quick way to do it. The feels like there's a nicer UI hiding there somewhere, but this gets the job done for now.
Right. And again, I think that's kind of the nice thing to do is like you know, so often you get caught up. I just need to get the work done, so let's get it done, and then we'll make it pretty later. And honestly, I think that's a lot of the value of thinking with Tinderbox is that, you know, there's that balance between just get it done and keep it pretty. And honestly, especially after reading the draft of Mark's book, the real intention is to get the work done. You know, and he's got a whole chapter or a whole section of the book called Tidying Up, is around theory of tidying your work. And at the end of the day, it concludes with, well, let's just focus on getting the work done and deal tidy when you need to. Yeah, Mr. Anderson?
I just thought it's a nice one while it's on screen. It's a good example about column view, which I use a lot. So here we turned it on because it allowed us to see all the sort rank at the same time, and then we could change that and the thing. And it's a good idea to get in the habit that when you don't need it, you can turn it off.
Right.
And the good thing is that as long as that tab exists within the document, it's the tab and not some other part of the document that remembers what the last used columns were. So you could have toggle them on and off. The point being that you can see that it's giving a value of sort rank for everything in the whole outline, which is not what it's not what you need, but that's just the way it runs. It's a bit like a sort of spreadsheet, and it will therefore not probably be too much of a stretch to see that if you do that, you think, oh, actually, I need to see 3 or 4 columns, and you've got quite a big file, and it's just more work that you don't need doing. So in other words, once you finish with the columns, just turn them off. They're always there. You can always put them back on again. So don't think that if you turn them off, suddenly you've sort of lost something. Think of column view as just a way of you being able to see concurrently the value. It's more often than not as something that you've probably got in display attributes of the note. It's just you want to see that attribute's value across a range of notes. I mean, you can do it in attribute. You can do it in attribute browser if you need to be doing it as part of some other part of the work. But if in the moment, as a good example here, we just say, right, well, what we need to do is we want to change the sort rank of the things that are read by this agent. That's a really nice little example of doing that. And you can, in fact, change the formatting. So if you, I know we're thinking in terms of 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's showing as a decimal. But again, going back to the point just made about don't over tidy, rather than waste time figuring out where to turn the format off, it's still working. It's just a number. It's just being shown a different thing. So don't worry unduly.
And change the format. I don't remember the L. Yeah. So if you change the formatting to L, it just makes it one number.
Yeah. So
that's super helpful. And then if you've got dates and stuff, there's ways to make that column view date, super easy too.
And for what I'm doing, this is sort of a manageable view because I'm not going to be trying to sort out 20 topics in one lecture. It's going to be like 5 or 6 things,
right?
For it the way I'm envisioning it working now.
Okay.
And if you don't have a lot of agents running, doing this sort of thing, actually just collapsing and expanding the agent container will often be enough just to kick it through. If you're working with thousands or notes or tens of thousands or notes, you might want to just explicitly go to the file update agents, especially because everything needs to run. But more often than not, if you haven't got a vast amount of load of running in the file, just basically closing and reopening the container in and outline should kick off a repoll of the query.
Well, while we're at it too, let me show you something else that I do that I think is kind of fun.
Michael, quick question before you show that. So the title of the agent node is just agent. Is that fixed, or is that like everything else something you can just
yeah.
Okay.
Agent is the default name. Whereas untitled is the default name of a node.
Right.
Yeah, we were just copying it back and forth, right? So, but I find this really, really helpful because again, I work with thousands of notes, and if you have many classes, bunch of agents running, that can create timing sequence issues within a Tinderbox file. And again, why have Tinderbox doing something when it's not necessary? And so I will often do this. I said, so I'm in the agent prototype, and I say, if agent priority is less than or equal to is less than 0. So you can turn an agent off by making its agent priority -1. That's the quickest way to turn an agent off. So you say, if agent priority is less than 0, then you want to make the display expression cache equal to name plus off. Yeah, right. And this is a nice little hack that I pulled together for myself. And then we can say else. And just reset it to default. Oops, shoot. I copied Mark's quote from the chat. To the default. Okay, so by doing that, and again, the regex is popping this up because it's expecting something else, but let's see what I've got going wrong here. Else, that should be fine, or did I not? Oh, that's why. There you go. So, so by doing that, what that will do, and then what we want to do is we just want to make sure the agent is actually using the display expression cache as its value in the display expression. So by doing that, when we go up here, oh, and then the other thing we want to do is, before I finish doing that, I want to say color equals red. And color equals nothing, or it goes back to default. So by doing that, if we go up here and we turn the agent off, display expression cache, agent off, that should have triggered. Oh, I see what we did. Because this agent's display expression is different. So let's just go ahead and copy this in here for now. I don't remember what we were doing here, but so now that I've got that code running in the agent, you'll see agent off.
Yep.
Agent on. Right. And so that's super, super helpful. So that way, you know, do I have this thing running or not running when you're skimming down the file.
And agent priority is a built-in attribute. So setting it to -1 turns it off.
Correct.
And here we are just like giving the visual indication
that I've turned it off. Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
And
right.
Michael, if you just show the action inspector query pane.
Which one?
Right. Next one along. Rightmost one. Action inspector. No, next one along. That's it. Left hand
Query.
one.
There you go.
And then in the bottom,
Oh, yeah.
there's a pop-up. I put a link. If you look at the ATBRF article on agent priority attribute, it has the link between the word labels there, the numbers, and essentially what they mean.
So like highest is 1, I think normal, or 1 or 2. So basically the larger the number, so like agent, an agent at 1 priority will run before an agent at 5 priority. So that way too, you can kind of time those as well. The other thing to keep in mind while we're looking at this screen is when you're in map view looking at agents, you might go and spend a lot of time making agents look pretty, running this. But then when I go ahead and now I'm going to manually force the update, what Tinderbox will typically do when it manually updates this, it could reset the
Right.
agent's view. So the way to fix that would be the let's go here, is the grid. Right. So if I go back in here and it ran, did it reset it as a grid? Let me double check in. No, it hasn't run yet. If I make it row, let me see if that works. And I'll rerun the agent now. It's funny that it's
How are
not
you
doing
forcing
it.
the agent to run?
Oh, no, because it's off. See, agent off. I forgot to turn it off, turn it back on. So that's again, that's how. So you see here, I've gone through all of this effort to make my aliases
Right.
pretty. I then rerun my agent, and all of that work gets destroyed. So the way to turn that off is here. You say none, or you use the attribute cleanup, I think. Yeah, cleanup action, right? And you set that to none. And so if you do that, that way, when you've made your pretty picture for all your aliases, I wish I knew this like 18 months ago when I'd spent hours with my doctoral dissertation and everything blew up. So if you do that, and now since this is set to none, the agent is set to none. When that reruns, I don't lose my map view organization of my aliases, which is a really nice little trick.
A nuance to bear in mind is that what it doesn't do is it doesn't move things around on the map. Obviously, if topic B no longer
is in the container,
topic D no longer met the agent, its alias would be removed. And I'm not entirely sure. I think it just finds the best place to put something if something new arrives. But what it won't do is it won't mess around with
we can try it.
that you've created manually.
So we've moved topic B out. And so when this alias reruns, it's going to re-add topic B. Let's go ahead and look at map view. So when the alias reruns, it's going to add topic B again, and it's just going to throw it up somewhere. because it didn't know where you originally had it.
And this gets around the fact that it used to be way back. The way you dealt with this was you turned the agent off, which was fine until you realized that, oh, you need to rerun the agent, by which time you realized it was too late. And it had just destroyed all the layout you'd use. So cleanup agent allows you to dissociate those two things.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we're kind of bouncing all over the place, and I don't feel like we've effectively updated or modified our code very much. Well, we haven't. I mean, and we've got about 14 minutes left. Is there anything that we want to play with or try here, Win? Because we didn't really finish this. This is kind of a hack at the end, and we hard coded a bunch of stuff. In terms of getting the predecessors, we didn't. The other thing we didn't do is we didn't populate when we're in a topic. We didn't populate the dependency relationships, the back and forth, which I don't think we have time for to do today. There's a lot we haven't covered, but I think we're kind of incrementally moving forward in this whole idea of how do you develop a class.
I have a quick question. Is displayed expression cache a standard attribute, or
No,
is that
that's
a
something I
convention
made up.
you use?
That's something I made up
and
3
that's
years
just to
ago.
avoid recalculating the display expressions, because they don't really change that much.
No, it's not that. The reason why I created display expression cache is, for me, it's a parked string variable that allows me to generate that string in action code independent of having to write the code in here.
Got it.
Right. So what I do is I just type in, populate, display expression cache. So I say, hey, Tinderbox, if your note has a display expression cache, use that as your display expression. Otherwise, you're going to be having to write all that action code in the notes display expression cache, which is something I don't want to do. I try to pull that code out.
Yeah, got it.
It arises from an old pattern where there were fewer ways to sort of store and re-show things. So people would often end up putting really quite gnarly expressions in display expression. And that then has to be done in real time. And anytime you do something to the outline that requires the outline, or indeed another view to recalculate the view, then all this
it would run all that code
that you don't think is actually happening, but it has to be done because you didn't tell the app otherwise. So by essentially creating it and freezing it, all that the reshow has to do is just take that string, which might be quite complicated in its creation, but it's now a static string and then can just be pulled straight to screen.
Right. So again, it's nothing that the average, I don't want to say average, it's nothing that you have to really concern yourself with in a note with, tens, hundreds, low thousands of notes. But when you start getting to a file with 10,000 plus notes and 100 agents, even on an M4, it kind of slows it down. So, that's an effective way of doing it. Moreover, too, you might get some timing issues because you may have some calculations happening over here that need to be done before this happens. So I just found the cache strategy to be much more effective.
Oh, it makes a lot of sense. And that's why I was curious about it. It's also one of those things that, like, knowing this, you can sort of like just adopt the convention early and not worry about it because it is not a hard thing to do.
Right. Right. It just becomes that
Right,
muscle memory thing.
It moves the logic for the action code closer to where things are happening.
Right. And again, maybe that's the last thing I'll kind of share too. With that in mind, so like if we go to the agent action here, and I think we've talked about this before, but we can do it again. It doesn't hurt. So we've stuck this code in the edict. And so what that means is every time this file runs, that edict's going to get triggered. And again, if in some of and I can pull up one of my files just to show you. In some of my files, show you in this way. Like, here's an example of one set of code that I have running on one of my prototypes. And then within this function, there's probably 78 lines of code in this function that's doing a bunch. And so if all of that is always running in the edicts, even on an M4 Mac, and you've got 10,000 notes, it's slowing things down unnecessarily. And so what I've adopted is a process where I actually only use edicts and I only use rules primarily on my containers or for like things the structural things that I need to be happening in my file. But when it comes to like the managing of the notes or and so often too, I find that I only really need to update a note when I've done something with it, meaning when I've touched it. Otherwise, it's just going to be pretty static. And and so for example, and I don't need Tinderbox constantly rerunning the display expression of that agent unless I've actually touched the agent and made a modification. So what I've done here is I use a strategy that I call on visit p agent. So this tells me that this is a stamp for on visit p agent. I type that code into my on visit p agent, and there isn't a UI element for this, which is not a big deal. If I go, where's my prototypes? So I go up to the agent prototype. So you'll notice here, I don't have any rules or edicts running in the agent now. So that's not going to slow down the computer. And then on here, I'll say I'll use the on visit attribute, which is another way of triggering action code.
That's not an agent, by the way. It's a note.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I jumped in.
Right.
I came in late on
Yeah.
the go. Sorry.
Right.
Okay, cool.
Right. So what I do here, because ideally, just like you have remove, I've asked Mark to do this. He's never gotten around to it. I think there should be an on visit tab here because on visit acts just like remove. It's a one-time trigger of action code. So what I do on visit agent, and so then I say stamp equals this. And then if I really want to get fancy, I say if prototype equals false, then stamp the note, right? So what that means then is when I come here and I hit -1, I come back, and then the next time I visit that note, that the on visit is triggering the stamp and is stamping the note. And so I run the vast majority of and I can show you here, I run the vast majority of my action code now with on visit triggers.
I've noticed you do that.
Because I just don't need this stuff running automatically.
I've noticed you do a lot of that. It must be making such a huge difference in performance, especially your
From a
files being as big as they are.
Yeah, from a performance perspective, for my doctoral dissertation, my dissertation actually hung up. And I spent a
Ouch.
couple of days trying to figure out how do I deal with this. And so I just removed everything out of rules and edicts and stuck them into on visit stamps, and like everything just flies now.
And that's what's a great thing about Tinderbox, just off the side of it, is like you can do these vast underlying infrastructural changes and your data set is just still the same.
Yeah, and it doesn't affect. I took me maybe 2 hours to move everything from rules and edicts into my on visits, and it was done.
Yeah, and you're not messing with your data actually with any of your text content. So it's so great.
Correct. So that's a nice little trick too that you might want to keep in mind.
Just a quick note on visit. One of the reasons it's sort of hard to just formalize as a sort of on visit for Tinderbox is the visit and the visit event actually comes into the code base by story space, which now shares a code base with Tinderbox and is sort of basically Tinderbox's older sister in some ways, but has, because it's done for basically primarily for story writing, the visit mechanism actually has a slightly different purpose. So I suspect that's one of the reasons that Mark is slightly leery at just shimming it in for this purpose, because you essentially have two slightly different processes both parked under the same name. It happens all the time in sort of bits of tech, but there's just that to bear in mind. And
the only reason why I pointed out that it's not here is one would expect it to be here, and just don't worry about it. It's easy enough just to go to the quick stamp and use and do the quick stamp.
And the other thing we sort of forget is that we tend to, as the human using the thing, we tend to be extremely clear in our own mind that we visited something or not. But you'd be surprised the number of times you touch things. So for instance, you can expand and collapse a container in the outline without changing the selection.
Right.
Like,
So
did
I
the
visit
container
the
that
note
you
when I do
collapsed,
this?
was it visited or not? So all these things actually turn out to be just a little bit more complicated. But the methods that Michael has described, I think, still cope perfectly well for this sort of scenario.
Now, this does raise up another issue. I don't want to call it an issue, but the concept that we're playing in the backstage is, what about an on remove or an on leave? Like, so I clicked this, I visited it, it ran the code, I made some changes, and then I click away. Well, do I want that code to re-trigger upon leaving? And apparently, to Mark Anderson's point, Mark Bernstein is not, it seems to be somewhat resonant in considering adding an on leave trigger, because there's a whole bunch of stuff we don't understand going on behind the scenes that he would need to think through. So with that in mind, the one thing to be aware, if you're using this on visit method, and it's really quick, visit the note, make some changes, click away, come back, click on the note again, and have it update itself, and then move on. So it's one extra click, but it works.
Yeah. So a thing to consider, if you know, if sort of stuck in this loop of, well, I want to do something when I leave, it is to reframe the problem as saying, okay, here are things I need to do as long as I'm still here, because I can only do them while I'm here. And that won't necessarily solve every instance, but I think will solve many of them. Whilst it would be convenient to have a thing that said, when I leave, it turns out that the state of leaving is sometimes in balance. And when you think of all the things we do via means of proxy use of aliases and things, it does turn out to be somewhat yours.
Yeah. Okay, we have about 2 minutes left. Any other thoughts, comments, questions as we wrap up our first North American
Michael,
session?
just to go back to earlier thing that we didn't get around to. This is the question. We don't have to try to build it right now. Is another way I think to do the dependencies would be that to do the comparison of, like, has the topic been covered before? So is topic A before topic B? Would be to simply look up the lecture number of A and B and compare them.
Yes. Yeah. And Mark, if you don't mind pulling it up real quick, you use to do that, you use the .intersect operator. And so what the .intersect operator does is it looks at the intersection between two notes and removes them. And I can show you an example of where .intersect is being used in my context. Is it in this one? Yeah, so .intersect works. No, I stopped doing it in this example. I was just thinking of, but yeah. That's funny. Yeah, so if you look at the intersection relationship between two notes, the other way to do that too is, and it might not seem intuitive, but using the mathematical operators of plus or minus with lists. So if you take list A minus list B, and if list A has A, B, and C, if list A is A, B, C, and D, and list B is A, B, and C. So you say, take list A and minus list B. What are you left with? D. And then that tells you, and then so you have this one item, and then you know what to do with it. D is the one thing that's not consistent between the two lists, and then you do with it what you want. And so I'll use that a lot for my auto unlinking scripts that I've written. So I'll say, look at the links that I'm linked to. Look at the links that this note's linked to. Compare the two sets of lists, the linked lists. That tells me which note's not, is missing. Delete that one. Right. So that's an operator you can use.
Right. I think I was approaching it without using the sets that we built up, though. The idea is that to trigger the indication that I've got a dependency violation is I only need to run through for every topic is to look at its at the at its lecture number and the lecture numbers of each of its relatively small number of predecessors, and check those. So we don't need to do the bookkeeping of accumulating the list of covered topics all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, go ahead.
And also your prior lessons are basically is the list of previous siblings. So
Right.
So those, if those siblings change, you can still get the list without having to explicitly know which the predecessors are.
Right.
So,
Alrighty,
great.
everybody. Well,
Really
thank you very
appreciate it,
much for
Michael.
the ping pong game we had today, going back and forth a bunch of stuff. That was fun. Art, you had a question? Sorry. Let's answer your question before we leave.
Okay. Only if you have a moment. It actually has to do with your use of Mark II. I quickly perused the Meetup video where you went through it a little bit, and also looked at Mark for a few minutes. I just had one question as to how does the Mark II app know what to train itself on? Are you pointing to it from within, or is it like Mark has the ability to stream whatever is in the active document?
I don't remember. I think it had to do. It had something to do with whatever the active selected note is what it's looking at.
Amazing. Okay.
If you look, and if you were and it's pulling from the preview, if I recall. So if I went like this, text preview paint. Whoops, no. If I went like this and I said preview all of the children of the notes, if I actually had a template tied to this, which I don't right now, it would show all of those notes. So it's whatever's being pushed into the preview gets pushed over to Mark II.
Amazing. Okay, yeah, I'll run it. I actually have Mark II, but then I allowed the demo to expire, so now I actually have to go sign up.
Yeah, I did. I didn't install it on my new machine either. So awesome. Well, hey everybody, this was fun.
Michael, two last
Thanks
quick
so much.
questions. I just put one in the chat. Is next week in the meeting Saturday or Sunday?
Next week is Sunday, so we're going to go back to the every other Saturday, every other Sunday schedule.
Okay, so but it's flipping. If like I had repeaters in the calendar, it's flipping from
Correct.
those.
Correct.
Okay,
It's flipping from that, and then let me do this. While we're at it, real quick. You can actually. Let me pull this up. You can subscribe to, and I'll drop it in the chat. You can subscribe to the Google Calendar that we have, and that will add. You can just add, just subscribe to the Google Calendar and have that added to your calendar, and that will give you the latest dates.
Fantastic. And then the
I did that, and it was
last
helpful.
thing is, you will post the updated file that we were messing around with today.
Yeah, as always. Great. Yeah. And the nice thing with the Google Calendar too is I'm also putting in like our APAC meetup that will be there, and then any courses or classes that I'm running, on the side will also be there as well. So like I'm kicking off cohort number 2, that class that Bruce was referring to earlier, that he took cohort number 1. Cohort number 2 kicks off next Friday, and we've already got 6 in person and like 7 or 8 people subscribed to watch the recording. So it's going to be a pretty big class this go around. It'll be fun.
Hey, I'm glad it's all like shaping up and working out. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's coming together great. It's
Look at you, like
really
teaching online, teaching in colleges. Look at you going.
Yeah,
Awesome.
it's really exciting. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Good job.
Yeah. Okay. All right, everybody. We will see you on Sunday the 12th.
Take care.
See you next week.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks everyone.
Bye.